on the Norwich Planning Commission. And I just wanted to acknowledge, we have two other Planning Commission members here, right? Jackie Allen.
Yes, here.
Susan Brink, also members of the Planning Commission. And we have members of other Norwich bodies.
They're all Norwich bodies.
BCA, but I'm not here as a BCA person.
What is BCA? What is
Board of Civil Authority.
Energy
great.
Committee, and
Okay.
Paul's on the Affordable Housing Committee. So, you know, bring a few seats over. So,
Yep.
I thought what we'd start is just really quickly go down and just introduce yourself. If you are doing something that's related to housing or you want to say briefly, that would be great. I'll model it. I'm Jeff LaBelle. I'm on the Norwich Planning Commission, and in my day job, I'm Director of Housing and Community Initiatives for a research and consulting firm called Path Associates.
I'm Jonathan Edwards. I actually live in Hanover. Although I spent a lot of time rowing on Norwich waters, so I have some belonging here. I was, for 15 years, the Planning and Zoning Director of Hanover, and helped to deal with a lot of similar issues in Hanover that we have facing now with housing. Many years before that, I worked for a construction company down in the southeast, states that are being barraged now by a hurricane, and developed about 800 apartment units through the Farmers Home 515 program. It was a mortgage subsidy program back then, and it was reasonably productive in poor rural towns. So maybe I've got something to offer here. Thanks for letting me in.
Thanks for coming.
John Courier, I live in Leesburg, Virginia, and I'm mostly just interested to hear what you have to say.
I'm Ann Foley. I've lived in Norwich for 30 years now, 31 years, only because my landlord charged me very low rent. And I'm thankful for that.
John Farrell, I live on Turnpike Road, and I'm just interested in what's going on in town, and that's why I'm here.
Hi, Roger Arnold. We just bought our home 2 years ago on 655 Route 132. Just invested in affordable housing and all of its intersections.
Jackie Allen, and I'm on the Planning Commission. I chair the board, and thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Hi, Ellen Hobson. Family's lived here just about 7 years, and just interested citizen with nothing useful to offer, but interested in hearing a little bit more.
Hello, I'm Rick Francis, I'm the planning director of Town of Norwich.
Judy Courier, Leesburg, Virginia. Again, just interested in what's going on.
Give it to the perspective.
Hi, Krista Maffei. I've been here almost 2 years and also just interested.
Paul Neal, I'm on the Affordable Housing Committee.
I'm Kathleen Shepard, a 40-year resident of Norwich and on the Affordable Housing Committee.
I'm Tim Briglin. I'm one of the 2 state representatives that represent Norwich in the state legislature.
Corwin Johnson, longtime resident, interested in the issue.
Mark Rolls, I live in Norwich, also interested in the issue.
Charlie Welch, I live in Norwich, about 25 years. I also work at DHMC in facilities management, and we are interested at DHMC in affordable housing and workforce housing specifically.
Want me to give my intro?
Just say who you are.
I'm Lynne LaBombard. I live in Lebanon and have some ties with Norwich. I've spent many years teaching Sunday school at that church.
Hi, I'm Steve Malone. I'm a real estate developer. I've been dealing extensively with the Act 250 land use permitting. I've obtained over 500 units of Act 250 approvals over the past 20 years. I'm very familiar with the costs associated with it. Primarily, my Act 250 projects have been in the resort environment, but I have done affordable housing. So I was asked by Jeff to come because of my background in Act 250. I also spent 6 years on the town of Killington's Planning Commission and almost 10 years on the ZBA. So we know in Killington that affordable housing for the resort environment is a critical issue. Largely, it is resolved down in Rutland because of costs up in Killington. It makes it really kind of prohibitive to develop affordable housing.
Has anybody not filled this out?
Norm Levy, lived in Norwich for about 23 years now, retired PH Doc. I'm interested in affordable housing and actually on the advisory board of Norwich Affordable Housing Inc. So I'm looking at any way with anybody who can get some affordable housing, regardless of race, creed, or color.
Is this to magnify, or is this for the television?
It's for the television.
Yeah, I've been listening. It wasn't I'm Allison Clarkson. I'm one of your 3 state senators for Windsor County District. I serve as the vice chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. And for many years, I represented Woodstock in the legislature, and we have had the devil of a time getting affordable housing built in Woodstock, workforce housing, and as many of you know, it took 10 years to get our one major project, Safford Commons, built, which ended up only being 26 units, but better some than none. But tomorrow we could build 300 workforce housing units, and they would all be snapped up.
I'm Susan Brink. I'm on the Norwich Planning Commission, and while this is not necessarily what I work on the commission, I certainly am engaged in trying to figure out this puzzle so we can have more housing here in Norwich.
I'm Daniel Johnson, Turnpike Road, former chair of the Norwich Planning Commission. I'm an architect. I'm married to Tree Moffett, who we live in the house she was born in. So a long-term Norwich resident.
Wow, well, great turnout, and thank you all for coming. It's obviously a really important topic, and you should have missed it because you didn't talk very loud. I just want to make sure we acknowledge Rob Francis, our new planning director. Very excited to have him here. Brings a wealth of experience from Brattleboro, and we're really looking forward to all you're going to be able to do for the town. So this is now the second of our educational series on affordable housing. We started off, if you may remember, with a series of small group listening sessions where we were trying to understand what were the issues that people were concerned about, what were people's ideas for the development of affordable housing in Norwich. We had 5 of those small group sessions. Many of you participated in one or more of those sessions. And based on those, we identified a series of topics that we wanted to learn more about. So last month, we had a session on the development of affordable housing using government subsidies. So we talked about the low-income housing tax credit and the Vermont Housing Bond Program, which are 2 very prominent and important programs for developing affordable housing. Today we're focusing on development of housing by the private sector. Most people who live, the overwhelming share of housing in the country is developed by the private sector. It's not developed with explicit subsidies. Actually, the bulk of housing that is affordable to low and moderate income families is also private housing that's not subsidized. It tends to be older housing that is sort of filtered down in price, just for background. We know from a lot of study, basically, that there's an overall shortage of housing in the Upper Valley. And as a result, our rents and our home prices are going up faster than our incomes are, which is a real problem. So there is a supply issue, and at the same time, there's also a shortage of housing affordable to people with low and moderate incomes. And this is, I would say, particularly the case in Norwich. What we've done is to structure this conversation is we've brought in 2 people who are very expert in the field. And I'm going to turn it over to them first. Just say some introductory remarks, and then we're going to have a conversation. And the ground rules for the conversation are anybody can talk. I'll try to take you in order. Try not to monopolize the conversation for everybody. but say your piece and hopefully listen to what other people have to say. We're really looking forward to a very productive conversation. So we're going to start, our two speakers, you heard Steve provided some of his background as a developer, and we'll be hearing from Steve. And first we'll be hearing from Lynne LaBombard, who has a real estate background, and she'll tell you a little bit about that. And ask them to talk about, how much does it cost to live in Norwich, and tell us a little bit about the economics, and what is there any affordable housing? Where is it? How do you find it? And then Steve's going to talk a lot about, well, why is it so hard to build affordable housing? Why can't we just tomorrow build 300 units of affordable housing in Upper Valley, and everyone will have housing they can afford? What are the obstacles? And then I think something for us to consider is what can we do about it? So all of this is going to feed in, just so you know, all of this is education. It's going to feed into the development of a affordable housing strategy for the town. It's called for in the town plan. We're not there yet, we're still learning. That's ultimately the goal and direction we're heading. So, turn first to Lynne.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Norwich Planning Commission. It's a nice, interesting group. I'm really curious about people that aren't from Norwich that are visiting from so long away. Are you hoping to take information and education back with you to your communities?
Perhaps a little.
Yeah.
I think in fairness, our daughter works at Dartmouth Hitchcock in workforce planning, and while she's not here tonight, and I'm not officially here as her proxy for anything, the fact she works here and is involved in their training.
Her initials SC? Are her initials SC?
Yes.
I see the resemblance. And I just had one question for you, as someone who just bought last year or last couple of years. Did you rent before you bought?
We rented in Fairleigh.
And what brought you to the Upper Valley?
My job at Dartmouth.
Your job at Dartmouth, okay. So now I've had a real estate license for 30 years. I'm a flatlander. I moved here almost 40 years ago, but I'm told by my father-in-law that always a flatlander, not the grandkids. But the interesting part of my job as a real estate broker in both New Hampshire and Vermont is that I started a firm in 1991 that represented buyers only. And it was the only one in the Upper Valley and continues to be the only firm that only works with buyers. So it gives me and my agents the unique perspective of when people come to town and find us, to really ask, what brought you here, and what are you looking for in terms of housing? And in those early years, it was actually the major employers like Dartmouth and the college and some of the other major employers who would reach out to my firm knowing that we don't have any listings to sell people, but they wanted to get good information in the hands of their employee candidates, because recruiting new employees is a huge investment, time, money, and the last thing they want is to spend weeks and months recruiting an employee, get them here to take a job, and then find out 3 or 6 months or at the end of probation, they didn't realize how expensive it was to buy a house, they didn't understand winters, and now they're gone. And that, I can't tell you how the first criteria, they have to have a garage. And mine being the look, what are you going to put in it? A car? I mean, who puts a car in the garage? But anyway, so it's a lot of information. It's a cultural change for a lot of people. Where did you come from? I'm not going to pick on you all day.
Yeah, from New York, from Brooklyn.
Okay, no cultural change. But I've yet to successfully transplant anyone from Indianapolis, and I don't know what that has to do with anything, but the cost of living must be really different. But it is. Yes. So I'm all about education, both as a real estate broker working with employees. I actually teach real estate classes now. I think after 27 or 30 years doing anything, you gain enough experience and hopefully some pearls of wisdom to be able to pass along to groups like this. And I've served on the Upper Valley Housing Coalition with Jonathan and Dr. Cooley, where I would do the daytime educational events with employers and employees, lunch and learns, and she would get bogged down in evening programs like these, trying to talk to zoning boards and communities about rezoning to be more conducive to housing and smart growth and all of that. And I recently was invited to Lyme. So all the community, I mean, I think that's wonderful because 10 or 15 years ago, it wasn't like that at all. And what we were doing then was to advocate on behalf of workforce housing, which has a lot of definitions, but basically, if you're working, how many jobs does it take to afford your housing? I mean, it really is, it's pretty expensive. So there's a good segue into, let's look at Norwich. I pulled up statistics today, and I pulled them from the multiple listing service because really, Zillow and Trulia, they get their numbers from the same database. They just call it a Zestimate or, you know, some other coined term. So I went to the source of the source and found that today in Norwich, there are 15 active listings. So those are properties that are currently on the market, and they have been on the market a median time rate of 83 days, with a median asking price of $569.9, not to be confused with $570. Okay. As we work down toward the closed transactions, which are the most telling, something jumped out that I'll share with you. But I decided at that point I needed to understand that bit of information a little bit better, so I went to Hanover. So at this point, I'll just pull in some of the Hanover stats because two different states, but same school district, and it drives a lot of the pricing for your housing. So in Hanover, and there's no condos currently on the market in Norwich. I know you have some, but there's none currently on the market. So I did not include any condos in Hanover, just so we would have apples to apples. So today in Hanover, there are 34 active listings. So they have more inventory on the market. It's also been there longer. It's been there 123 days. And their asking price is not too far out. It's $619.5, the median asking price, okay? But now let's get to where the rubber meets the road. How many are actually under contract or pending today? So in Norwich, you have 8, Hanover has 10, so not too far apart. The median asking price, see, we don't know what the contract is until it closes. So the median asking price in Norwich is $567, and in Hanover it's $835. Okay? All right, so hold that thought. Now let's look at the properties that have actually closed, and I went this year, January 1 of 2018 to today, September 17th of 2018. And in Norwich, there's been 36 closings, and in Hanover, there's been 37. So, I mean, it's pretty interesting. The market, we've been through a giant correction called the Great Recession or whatever in 2009, and then we had a glut of inventory. Consumer confidence came back, interest rates were low enough. The people have really come into the market, really losing inventory quickly. The median asking price of those closed transactions in Norwich was $644, and the sold price is $637.5. So not that far off. But what's interesting in Hanover is the median asking was $650, and the median sold was $660. And I know, yeah, it's a bidding war. It's also a tactic used by some seller agents. I like all real estate agents, so don't want to say some seller agents, but if you're a seller, you know, some people do this as a tactic of getting the property ready to put on the market, and they put it on, but you can't see it for a week, and, you know, everybody gets in a frenzy. So it does kind of generate some overbids on occasion. But that wasn't the part that was really kind of skewed in my mind. I decided, well, this year wasn't good enough. I wanted to see how it compared to last year, because this year has been really busy for real estate agents. And I teach people who want to get a real estate license, and they're coming out of the walls because it's such an easy job. So when you look back 1 year, January 1st, 2017 to September 17th of 2017, okay, there were 39 closed transactions here in Norwich and 60 in Hanover. So the inventory was absorbed from Hanover before it came over to Norwich, which kind of sort of makes sense. And then the asking price in Norwich was 465, and the median, not average, the median sold was 465. And that compares to 1 year later, we're up in the sixes over here. So that's a pretty big, that's a 27% jump.
In 1 year.
In 1 year, that's not just pretty big.
Well, prices paid.
Huh? But they closed.
That's the prices paid are up 27%
Right.
in 1 year.
And in Hanover, they were still in the same range, the mid
Give
sixes.
a range of properties from
Well,
most expensive to the least.
the median is bringing them right in. All those 60 come in and all the 36 right into the, okay, go ahead, you were first.
Would you happen to know off, just roughly, how many residential properties are there in Hanover versus Norwich?
You know, in Norwich, I looked at a stat somewhere that suggested 1,000 households, but I don't know if.
1,500.
I'm sorry, what?
1,500.
1,500. Okay, I have no idea. Hanover,
Hanover is
Julie?
something like 7,000.
Isn't it great having all the resources?
7,000 households?
I don't have to answer all the questions.
That counts student, off-campus student residents.
Yeah, so that, it's a totally different market.
Lynn, maybe you can correct what I'm about to say, but I think it's in line with what you've just been saying. And that is at the last May's Housing Coalition Breakfast, which happens every 6 months, and it's really a gold mine of information. And that's been taken over by
Vital Communities.
Vital Communities. And what I recall, the statistics coming out was that in roughly the dozen towns that are the core of the Valley Valley, including Hanover and Norwich, the average household income at current mortgage rates would mean that the average household in the core of the Upper Valley would not be able to afford a house more than $300,000 to $325,000 as a purchase price. And at the same point, in that whole group of a dozen towns around here, there were only 27 houses in that price range that were available for purchase.
So I actually, the Vital Communities, the next business leader breakfast date is October 26th, 7 a.m. at the, is it still called the Fireside?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. At the Fireside. It's like an 8 to 9 talk, hugely intensely informative, and different speakers, and Buffett Henry does a real estate update, and I do a rental update in a few minutes. But I did pull that slide that Jonathan is referring to because I found it fascinating. But then I also decided, because we're dealing with real numbers, that, and I took a 550 median. You need, the buyer needs 10 to 15% down payment to not have to pay the private mortgage insurance, okay? So that's $82,000 on a 550 purchase. And then you're gonna have 3 to 6% for closing costs, or $30,000. So that's a lot of the green stuff in the brown paper bag just to get to a lender and a closing, let alone the job and the income to support that, which would be, you would need an income annually of 114 or 9,500 monthly. So this is where, how many jobs does one person have, or how many people in a household are going to contribute to that kind of a gross income to support the cost of housing. I'm happy to pass this around, but if anyone wants to look at it.
What's the median household income?
It's on that sheet. Yeah, well, Norwich is not there. Hanover is there, Lebanon's there, and Hartford is there. And then I think Buff took an average of those 3 towns' median incomes. I mean, you're
At 72,000 for the median for those 3 towns.
the average of those 3, yeah. So I'll hand over the mic because I've got lots of information. I can't wait for the questions. Thanks.
Yeah, Norwich has a large, a very high median income. That's a function of the housing costs, right? So it's not like, just have to remember that, right? It's the housing costs that dictate the incomes, not necessarily the.
So I'm going to talk
Can
about.
I just say, are you going to ask questions, or how do you want to?
So what I'd like to do is let Steve have his fill,
Okay.
and then I'd like to have a conversation. So it's less about, if you have a question, that's great, but more about just people sharing and talking.
So I'm going to focus on two elements related to land use entitlement and cost, which also relates to risk. Because as a developer, I deal with private equity funds that come in to do projects with me. They look at Vermont as a very risky environment to make investments in real estate development deals. You know, you go to New Hampshire, the entitlement process is a little bit more streamlined. It's not as risky because you're not dealing with an Act 250 entitlement process. You're basically going to go to your town, get your site plan and your PUD approval, and you're going to go to the state environment of conservation and get your quality permits, your environmental quality permits. Here in Vermont, once you exceed 9 units, you are into a full-blown Act 250 permit. Right now, I'm doing a brand new project up at Killington. Now, it's a resort development. I can price my product at a much different price point than I could for an affordable housing. But my all-in cost for this new project for 150 units is $1.6 million without the land. $160,000 of that is an application fee to Act 250 with no guarantee of getting a permit. So when I do a project like that at Killington, we can project an absorption and we can project a square footage price. I can sell at $550 a foot for that kind of a product out there. Now, you get back over to affordable housing projects, you can see that you're going to have to step that number down substantially. But are you able to step down the cost and the risk of going through the Act 250 process? So you can save money maybe on architecture, but you're not going to save money on land planning, environmental consultants, civil engineering. You're still going to have those costs regardless of what kind of project that you're going to do. You can get off-the-shelf architecture for affordable housing that you don't have to pay a lot for, but these other costs and these application fees are going to still be there. Now, with the 9-unit exclusion, you know, a developer can come into Norwich and do a project, but if he comes back and does a second 9-unit project, that triggers Act 250.
Well,
yeah. So that makes it very difficult. So it really becomes a numbers game to amortize these costs over the life of the project. So small projects like a 20-unit project, if you've got a cost of land plus maybe $6,000 a unit in entitlement fees, it's a really difficult one to get your hands around and to manage the risk. So the other side of it also is that when we're developing real estate, there are always things that happen when you're developing a site that are not necessarily predicted. You might have extra lead, or you might uncover a spring. I've had that happen. Now you got to de-water a site. When I'm at $550 a foot at Killington, if I make a mistake, there's still some profit that's left over. But if I'm going to sell a $200,000 project, you know, per unit price, and if I have a $20,000 error in the construction cost, there's the profit. It's gone. So it makes it very difficult. So it's really a matter of having to figure out how you can adjust the densities. I will give you a suggestion that I've thought about, and Jeff and I talked about this a little bit. I have a summer home on the New York side of Lake Champlain. We're in the Adirondack Park. The Adirondack Park permitting process is actually more difficult than Act 250, but it is one of the most preserved places in the United States. If you've been over there, I'm sure you've seen it. What they've done over there, they've allowed for local control up to 99 units. So you can get a non-jurisdictional letter from the park agency if you do not exceed 99 units. There's a couple other triggers that could push you back into APA planning process, like if you exceed a certain amount of height or if you're involved with wetlands. But if you get the non-jurisdictional letter at the local level, you'll go through the planning process. You'll still have to get the environmental quality permits from the state, but you can do something there and get to the densities that make a project supportable. So if you have questions, I'm happy to.
Steve, just to make sure I understand that, so that you're saying basically they can get around the, they don't have to go through the New York State version of Act 250 If they're under 99 units. is
They're
that
under
what you're saying?
99 units, and there's certain triggers that could still push them back into APA planning. If you exceed 40 feet in elevation of a building, or if you are involved with any type of impact on wetlands, the APA can come back in. But typically, they'll only come back in on those particular matters. They leave it up to the town to deal with the other issues, as long as the town has duly adopted site plan and zoning ordinances that the APA has acknowledged. So I think it's a really interesting idea that could be brought to bear in Vermont if towns truly really want to have affordable housing. You know, there's a decision that was done many, many years ago. Jeff, you probably know about the Mount Laurel decision in New Jersey. What's happened in New Jersey, there was what they call snob zoning. Towns like Saddle River, New Jersey, didn't want to have affordable housing. The state came in and said, well, you can't have snob zoning. They came out through a decision called the Mount Laurel decision, and they enabled towns who did not want to have affordable housing to pay for the affordable housing in adjacent towns. So in Saddle River, New Jersey, you don't see affordable housing, but Saddle River is paying Malone, New Jersey for their affordable housing allocation that they have to meet. So there's a couple of different ways you can attack the issue.
How's that work?
It's been working pretty well. It's been adjudicated multiple times. And people are developing the affordable housing units up in Bala and other towns like that.
But you said that,
I'm sorry, I want to get to one question, but we get to
Sure.
this. I just want to make sure. So the thing you're talking about would require a change in state law,
It
right?
would require a change in the Act 250 rules.
So before you get to the other questions, I just want to know, do you have any recommendations for what a locality could do within the existing state law to try to make it easier for lower cost housing to be developed?
Well, I mean, again, as soon as you go to above the 90 unit threshold, you will be dealing with a full-blown Act 250 permit, okay? And so, you know, if you could change zoning designations within your town to allow for higher density development, given the fact that you're still going to have to go through the Act 250 process. Other than that, obviously infrastructure, town water and sewer. When you're up here in the North Country, town water and sewer are a critical element. To have to handle on-site wastewater disposal is a very expensive proposition. And it's a lot of upfront infrastructure costs before you get to the first saleable unit. And again, that's what investors and developers look at. The general theory of real estate development is the least amount of road and infrastructure to the first closable unit that you can build. Yes, sir.
but what's going to prevent you from, like, saying, keeping within the 9-unit parcel? Why can't you do 9 units on Avenue A, 9 units on Avenue B?
Different developer would have to do it.
I realize that, but
Yeah.
so that wouldn't require Act 250 then?
It would not require Act 250 if it's a different developer doing a 9-unit.
Oh, you need a different developer.
Yeah, as soon as the same developer goes and does the next 9 units, the first 9 units are exempted from Act 250, the next 9 units are going to be involved with an Act 250.
Even if it's the same, it's a different property?
It's in the same town.
And that's a lifetime thing for that developer?
Yeah. I mean, and then, you know, there's people who can play some games with different legal entities, but if they catch on to the fact that you manipulated, they're gonna grab the opportunity to bring you back in.
So Steve, help us understand why is it important to develop more than 9? I mean, does it cost the same amount to develop a 9-unit property as a 20? I mean, help us understand.
Well, it's critical mass. I mean, it's a matter of, like, if you want to get to a certain affordable volume and do a large-scale development, you know, if you want to do a 50-unit development, you've got to factor in the land cost and then these entitlement costs to bring in and still come out with a margin. We try to shoot for a profit range of about 25% per unit. The rule of thumb is 25% for the land and infrastructure, 50% for the vertical construction cost, and 25% left over for marketing and profit. So what typically happens with everybody who's in development, that 25%, if they're lucky, ends up being somewhere between 15 and 18% if they've managed the process correctly.
And is
Very rare.
there economies of scale? Is that what you're talking about?
It's economies of scale. So like if I'm going to pay for an architect, and architects are not cheap as far as, you know, you're an architect. You know, if you're doing a large scale.
You're worth it.
They provide a valuable piece of the development process. And if you have a cost of architecture, like my cost of my architecture for Killington is about $350,000 for 2 different product types. And then there's a residual that the architect receives as we build out the project. This is like an intellectual licensing factor. So if I'm taking that cost and I'm amortizing it over 150 units, I can live with it. But if I have to amortize that over a smaller amount of units, then I'd have to sell at a much higher price. I mean, I could do a small project at Stowe. Believe it or not, Stowe is $1,000 a foot slope side right now. It's priced like Deer Valley and Beaver Creek. So when we do our metrics, we don't even look at the Stowe numbers anymore because we just can't factor that.
So what we're going to do, I think, is kind of go around like this, just so we don't lose anybody, and keep coming back if you have questions, or otherwise just go ahead.
What is the development cost per foot in Norwich?
Well, I mean, typically right now, you can do new construction in the Upper Valley market somewhere between 175 and the low 200 range for cost, for new construction cost. Now, that's not land. That's site and vertical construction. And then you might have some impact fees like water and sewer connections that would be added onto that. So you can see right away.
You're at 400,000.
Yeah.
Without land.
Without
No, he said 50% for vertical. There's
vertical construction cost typically is about 50% of your
right, and then you have another 50% for land
profit. Yeah. So you can see, to really get to affordable housing, you know, you probably are looking at some level of higher density and some level of support to get the price point to a place where it really becomes affordable, which was what you were involved with.
That's what we are.
I mean, there is some new construction going on in okay, so it's a development that was approved a decade ago. That developer sold it to, before he built anything, he got the approval, sold the development to a builder who went under, trying to build, and then sold it to someone else. But that project is now taking off. They're building and selling at about 200 a square foot, including the land.
So how much does that go, what does that translate into in terms of actual unit?
380 to 425.
For a 3-bedroom?
They're
2-bedroom?
mostly at least 3s to 4s, 2.5 to 3.5 baths.
How many square feet?
2-car attached, an 1,800 to 2,800 square foot. So they've got different styles. So I mean, it can be done, but the good news is the trend now, after 30 years of watching real estate buyers buy tiny homes. I mean, people are looking for smaller square footage, more efficient homes, which is usually a smaller vertical kind of setup, and so that's good news.
Keep in mind, just one thing, Jeff, when you're developing vertical construction, your square foot price actually goes up the smaller your building. Your price per square foot is more expensive the smaller the space.
It's the economies of scale.
As you build bigger, you're amortizing that cost per square foot over a larger volume.
What?
Give him the...
Yep. Sorry.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Let me just spell that out a little bit more clearly. So think of the cars as a metaphor. You could have a full-size pickup truck, or you could have a Toyota Yaris. They both need steering wheels, they both need windshields, they both need windshield wipers, they both need seat belts. So the price per square inch of a Yaris is actually pretty high. The price per square inch of a full-size pickup truck is actually pretty low. There's just a lot of it. The metal isn't the issue. It's all the things that go in it and things like the property that you've got to pay out on. And it's the same for a house. Every house needs a bathroom. Every house needs a kitchen. Every house needs a front door, a back door, and a window in every room. Even if you cut down the number of rooms, you haven't really eliminated most of the components. Drywall and shingles on the outside or something, that's not the expense. The bathroom is the most expensive the kitchen and the bathroom are the two most expensive rooms in the house because of the amount of stuff that's in there and the amount of work it takes to build them. If you were just going to build empty rooms like this one, this is actually really cheap space because in fact it's, as we all can tell from the smell, it's a basement. So it's just sitting here and got reutilized as workable space. But this is not, this space is almost free relative to the rest of the building.
Thank you, Russ.
I wasn't exactly clear about the process with the 99 in terms of what kind of environmental considerations there were. My concern is having each town have to figure out what their environmental rules are, and being on a committee here and knowing how few people there are to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, I can address that.
Yeah.
So at the local level in the Adirondack Park, you're dealing with site plan review, and if you're filing a planned unit development, which is a real estate term of art that allows you to cluster and set aside open space, which most development out nowadays would utilize a PUD, you're still dealing with the state of New York's DEC for your environmental quality permits.
DEC is
Environmental Conservation.
Okay.
So there's no loophole around the environmental quality permitting piece. That would still stay in place, and it would still stay in place here in Vermont if we adjusted Act 250 to get some more local control. And I don't know that 99 units is the magic number for here. I'm just giving you the example of how they have local control in one of the most preserved places in North America.
Yeah, that was my question. It wasn't the 99.
Yeah. So, that's...
Thank you.
Yes.
Two related questions. The first is, I'm kind of coming into this a little late. In terms of private developed affordable housing, what is the official definition of affordable housing? And do you get any sort of subsidy, tax subsidy for creating, quote, affordable housing? And then the second question is, in a town like Norwich, where it's really just a cycle of richer people moving in and the prices get jacked up, and it's, I'm just wondering, like, how many more units of housing would we need in general to make any impact on the average price?
Let me take those a little bit first, because when we set this up, we did not put a definition on affordable housing, right? At least my starting assumption is everybody needs a home they can afford, right? And a healthy housing market has housing at all price points. So there is no official definition of affordable housing anywhere. We have different subsidy programs that have definitions, but there's no single definition of affordable housing, right? There are programs that have different definitions about what qualifies. So there's a low-income housing tax credit, for example, that is available for projects that are affordable to people at 60% of the median or below, right? So, but that's what we talked about at the last session, right? This is about trying to develop without subsidies. Just one piece. But the other thing I think that's really important is to think about this issue of supply and demand, right? So supply and demand operates at the regional level and not at the town level. So if you built 300 more housing units here, or let's say you built 20 new housing units in Norwich, and there was no restriction on it, you could probably sell them for that 600,000, right? Because the demand is so great in Norwich, right? But if somebody came in who was mission driven and said, I want to develop housing at below market levels and sell them, then they could do that, right? So my personal belief is that at the regional level, we need more supply. But if we want housing in a place like Norwich to be affordable, it's going to have to be done by somebody who's going to promise to keep it affordable, right?
So that was my question is, we can talk about building cheaper units, but I'm just curious, how long would they stay cheap in the town of Norwich if there's not some sort of official agreement?
So there's a number of ways to tackle that. I mean, with the affordable housing tax credits, the developer sells those tax credits and raises funds for the development. One of the I think one of the more interesting approaches in resolving affordable housing is where you do mixed-use development of market rate and affordable together, okay? And there are ways to keep those affordable units affordable because they could be developed, let's say, on a ground lease and not for sale on as far as a lot and not underlying. Or you can put a deed restriction in the deed when it's conveyed to the buyer that there can only be a certain percentage of appreciation per annum associated with that particular unit. I do think the mixed-use approach is a more practical way to go about this, where you could zone a parcel of land, and I don't know your zoning districts in Norwich, but if you had parcels that you could identify and say, you know, we're going to change the zoning here for higher density, but on that higher density development, we're going to allocate 25% to affordable. I'm just making a number up to give you an example, but that's a way you can use a market-driven solution that has affordable components backing it up and get a net result where you have actual units that are affordable, but you still have market rate units that are being conveyed to other people in the region.
So I just have one question about that. Isn't Stony Creek like that?
Star Lake, you mean?
No, I don't mean Star Lake. Stony Creek, it's on Route 5.
The apartments are.
It has apartments and some are subsidized and some are.
Are the tax credit, tax credit rate?
No, they have some subsidized.
Really?
Yeah.
There's an apartment building.
So there's a great example of what Steve has just been speaking about in White River that just opened a couple months ago. Bill Bittinger, Hanover developer, who develops a lot in Vermont actually, has just developed a mixed-use building on it's called Bridge in Maine, and you can all see it. It's right across from Tucker Box. And I went to the opening, and it's very exciting because all those units, save one, are workforce housing and done at a rate, and they are maintained because he did partner with the feds and with the state, has lots of tax credits that he was able to draw down to ensure that they stay affordable. He has marketplace rents down on the first floor, he has shops down on the first floor, and there are a couple apartments that are market rate, but the vast majority of them are at a workforce / affordable housing price. So we have a model right actually close by that you can all take a peek at.
On the other side of the river, Guy Hill right now, it's the same arrangement.
Guile Hill has 49% affordable units and 51% market rate units. Market rate units, as was described, does help to subsidize the loss of revenue because of the affordable the income from the affordable housing components there. There's 120 units there. In many respects, it had a lot of subsidies. It had, the standard ones you were talking about, like tax credits. The town gave that land to the developer for free. The town also paid for all the infrastructure down there. Wow. And the town paid for doing all the environmental monitoring. So it was definitely highly subsidized by the local public sector. Dartmouth does a similar program with individual single-family houses in two neighborhoods. There's about 60 of them up near the reservoir. And those are, they're sold below market. There are deed restrictions. The college provides low-interest mortgage rates. The college requires that the appreciation on a house is determined only by the cost of living index and nothing else. So that, and also anybody that wishes to build in addition doesn't get the money, gets 1/10 of that cost every 1 year in terms of allowance for extra appreciation. So it's a very much controlled system. It seems to work. They had a lot of trouble trying to work it out getting IRA permission, because some of that had originally been decided, those benefits had been determined by IRA to be wage benefits. and not housing authorities, but that finally got worked out. So there's some programs that are active in the area and that actually work. However, Dartmouth does a subsidy, the town did a subsidy for tile. We've had no luck in terms of getting private sector affordable housing or workforce housing. And that's a lot because of our zoning problems.
So, Beth, I want to hear about these zoning problems now.
That's not a problem here, why do we even bother with that?
My name's Beth Long, started King and Lake, I'm with Twin Pines Housing. So if I could just correct the record, Twin Pines is obviously very interested in affordable housing, and we work pretty hard to try to make sure everybody's on the same page, because if everybody has the same facts and terminology, it helps the conversation. So Bill Bittinger's building is great. It's financed by low-income housing tax credits. There are 15 units at 60% or less, and 2 units that are market, which in Vermont are typically maxed out at 120% of AMI. I don't actually know if that's the case with Bill's, but I'm pretty sure.
AMI stands for Area Median Income.
Yes, thank you. And Guile, right now, Guile is a fabulous project, and you probably know better than most. Guile had a very long and difficult development life. Twin Pines and 2 banks took huge losses because if you develop real estate with a market component, then you're at the risk of market downturns. And the land was gifted to Twin Pines in 2005. It was finally permitted in 2006. The units were first built, the market units were first built in 2007 and came on the market in 2008. And the profit from those units was supposed to finance the construction of the remainder of the project. Well, everybody here knows what happened to the real estate market in 2007 and 2008. So in Twin Pines, we talk about that development a lot because today that development is terrific. But as you said, it was not only assisted by the town of Hanover with the gift of the land, but a lot of people lost a lot of money on it, including Twin Pines. And so it's high risk. It's great at the end of the project, but there's market risk in a downturn. So I just wanted to make sure that you're all on the same page. Thanks.
Thank you. So before we get back to you, because we've heard from, I just want to make sure nobody else who hasn't had a chance to talk, let's talk. We'll come back to you, right, Paul?
I would like to come back to the Act 250 comments because I know that Act 250 is under current discussion and revision. And so are there any anticipated changes in Act 250 focusing on what the state really wants? So if the state really wants more affordable housing, can it adjust Act 250 to have multiple tiers such that the things we want, affordable housing, solar projects, preferred siting, those sort of rules can be applied to Act 250, whereas full market value, maximum, no offense, but when you're selling in a ski area, I don't feel as sympathetic as I am selling to low-income affordable housing. Too long a question, but have anything to say?
I think Tim and I have both been to these Act 250 meetings. I hope some of you have been too, because they're still taking comments. So the planning commissions should be weighing in with the Act 250 commission as they are working to update and revise. And the choice was to not nickel and dime and make, because many of us had built in about affordable housing changes to Act 250. And instead of making those changes, they said, let's finally look at it as a whole after 50 years, and you're like, or however many years it's been, yeah, it's 50 years.
Early 70s.
Yeah, it's 50 years.
It's 50th anniversary.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. Yep, so it is, and I think comments, all of your comments would help support, but that conversation is definitely happening. And planning commissions should be weighing in with the Act 250 commission.
Just so it doesn't bury what we really want to do in terms of having one big solution fits all.
So, one thing that I have found, I have a theory that the people at the state level in both New Hampshire and Vermont don't fully understand the Upper Valley. And so, if you look at areas that are within commuting distance of jobs, right? They're only, within Vermont, for example, there's only six block groups that have more than 3,000 jobs. And actually, and all of them have more than 8,000 jobs. So there's a huge gap between the places with the most jobs and places and everywhere else. And 3 of those block groups are in the Upper Valley, Lebanon, Hanover, and Medical Center, the VA Medical Center in Hartford, and 3 of them are in Burlington. And I don't think anybody gets it, because we have the same housing problems they have in Burlington in terms of sort of demand-driven costs. But I don't think we're part of, because it's a bi-state region, I think it's very hard. I think that New Hampshire probably has some of the same problems. And that, you might think about, maybe there should be special rules in places that are close to jobs to get more housing there, so people don't drive in long distances, right? Anyway, let's hear from Paul.
Unfortunately, all the projects that you were talking about today are not applicable here in Norwich. We have no sewage and we don't have water. And so you are not going to get any large developments in this town unless that changes. And so we have to kind of like dial down the size of these projects because it's just not going to work. That worked in Hanover because you had septic.
Yeah, but what about connecting to neighboring towns? Besides sewer?
Fine, but I mean, we've gotten nothing but resistance whenever you mention hooking up to Hanover. That's the reality. And you're just going to get, you're going to get pushback. I've been at this for years, and it never materializes. Every project you mentioned had infrastructure, and we don't have infrastructure. So somehow we got to change the discussion or kind of think of alternatives. But I'm really tired of banging my head against the wall. It doesn't work here.
I appreciate that, Paul, but I would argue that we do have areas that are adjacent to infrastructure. If we chose to exercise it, it would require an extension, but it's not like we don't have them. So I hear you. Rod, did you want to say?
Thank you. So there's a meme joke that goes something like, Burlington's really nice and it's very close to Vermont. That's possibly true of the Upper Valley too. So if you think about the Vermont legislature, it's comprised of representatives that represent towns somewhere between the size of Norwich and, Putnam, 2,000 something rather. So tiny relative to even the Upper Valley, right? And so their issues and concerns are not actually very much like Norwich's or the Upper Valleys. So you're right, your observation is correct. The advantage if you're in Chittenden County and if you're in Burlington metropolitan area is that you do an end run around the state. And so Burlington and South Burlington receive funds directly from HUD.
Like CDBG and funds, yeah.
Yeah, they get their CDBG funds direct. And so they don't have to work through the state priorities, they don't have to work through the state bureaucracy. They go straight to Boston and DC to get their cash. And so they actually have much more flexibility and much more focused on market-driven or public-private partnerships. And so their housing solutions are a little more dynamic and a little bit more responsive to the conditions that they're working with. The rest of the state is lumped in with everybody else, and so you get a kind of averaged out product. And I think it's an interesting observation to make, and I don't know how far you'd get with it, because how do we make it special? It doesn't always work in Montpelier, I think. So, yeah, that would be my observation.
John. Thank you. John Farrell. I live in affordable housing in Norwich, believe it or not. And the reason I live in affordable housing is because the person I rent my apartment from is not greedy. I lived on Church Street for 3 years. The tiniest apartment you can imagine, at $750 a month plus utilities, which today probably is pretty cheap. I'm happy to report that I pay almost half of that right now. And I live in a very nice place, with a brook in the garden, because the person who rents that apartment to me does not want to make a huge profit. If you go on the listserv, you constantly see apartments for rent in Norwich, $1,000, $1,200, $1,500. They're probably pretty nice, but I've never had a mortgage in all the houses I've owned that was that high. So I just wanted to make that point. When you start charging $1,100, $1,200, $1,300, $1,500 for an apartment in Norwich, then perhaps it's used to offset their mortgage. It's free market, they can do what they want. My second point is relating to what Paul said about infrastructure. I recently read on the listserv that Pathways Consulting, in regard to the Marion Cross School, proposed 3 different options to fix the septic system. $125,000 was a low end, $300,000 or somewhere around there was a middle of the road one, and then connecting to, is it Hartford or Hanover sewer system was $1,250,000, if my numbers are correct. So my point is, if the Marion Cross School has to do something about their septic system, which they do, and the town votes to do that, and the town absorbs that cost, Route 5 South, which we're all talking about in general, about, workforce housing or multi-use housing, that means the developer, if they come in, is going to have the sewer system, the water system in place at the cost of the town. If the town goes ahead and does that, our taxes will go up. Right now, there's no infrastructure. If a mega development, and I hate to use that word, but if a mixed-use development goes in on Route 5 South, then that means the developer will have to absorb those costs, as it should be. The other point is, there was some discussion about small hamlets, which I agree with. I think you've got Star Lake, you've got these other 1 or 2 small developments that are affordable. And I lean in that direction rather than a large development in the town of Norwich.
So I want to come back, Jonathan, to your, I'm going to take your question, but I want to come back to this zoning issue that you mentioned. I'm interested to hear more about that.
Well, that's where I was headed. 2 things I'd like to back up exactly what Paul said. I think it's time to change the discussion about infrastructure. I believe that there's been a lot of planning around Route 5 South, with one of the intents was hooking up, and it seems as though there was a lot of resistance to that idea, and there's always been resistance to the idea of hooking up to Hanover. Concerted effort to stymie both of those things. And I think that the planning commission has worked hard to work on zoning that incorporates affordable housing, and it's always met with a significant amount of resistance. So I would like to go to your question to talk about zoning.
Okay.
I
am interested in hearing your perspective.
Well, I'm retired from Hanover, So I can
You
basically
can talk.
say anything I want to without getting fired.
We can fire you retroactively.
I still have an income.
That's right.
At any rate, Hanover was trying to deal with the issue about how do we get more diverse housing. And it wasn't so much in the scope of let's focus on affordable housing, workforce housing, tiny housing. It was how do we get, I mean, we have a very diverse population. We have a lot of transient people who move in, do, their internships and so forth, and then they leave. But they would like to build up some equity if they can, instead of, throwing all their money to a landlord in rent. And the issue is that the house, as we've heard from Lynn, the housing costs, even purchase or rental, are very high in Hanover as they are in some other towns, particularly Norwich and Lyme. Lebanon seems to be gaining in that direction as well. And so the issue was, let's not think about big developments. We were trying to figure out some way that we could increase development flexibility and feasibility on small projects. The planning board did a lot of walking. Spent 2 years walking every Wednesday afternoon around different Hanover neighborhoods. How do we verbalize and record the characteristics in each of the neighborhoods? We divided it up from the inner part Hanover plain area into about 10 neighborhoods. We have some rural neighborhoods too. And how do we have some mixed development? How do we capitalize on making use of 3-acre lots with one house on it, where there's plenty of room for 2 or 3 more houses on it? And can that form a way of helping with already paid costs? How do we exercise or get developers or landowners to utilize their equity that way? And that also would be, if you've got the typical New England farm, which has a farmhouse and attached outbuildings and a barn. There's an example of that, for instance, of that in West Lebanon, where that has all been revitalized and made up into, or rehab, made into, I think, 3 or 4 apartments. The owner lives in the old house, the other parts are subdivided into apartments. That could be for caretakers, for people who, one-person households and so forth, whole variety of things. Same way with big houses in town, same way with big lots in town. Because we thought, if we wanted to put in, let's think about the model of what in Hanover would be a huge development. 20 dwelling units in one spot. The reading of whenever that's been attempted, even in terms of buildings, multi-unit buildings, or in terms of big subdivisions, those never really became popular. Lots of worries about those environmentally, lots of issues about expanding infrastructure, lots of issues about repair. We, just before I retired, this is going back to 2012 now, we had a series of public workshops. We had a 67-page listing with illustrations and pictures of choices that the town could consider. And then once people decided what kind of choices they'd like to make available in different neighborhoods, they didn't all have to be the same, then we could revamp the zoning accordingly. And it was basically we were trying to plan the town and then apply the law. Unfortunately, so many people saw all various options and focused on what they regarded were the worst ones. And there were a whole variety of worst ones. everyone in that category as being one, worse one. And it basically wound up being what had started out to be hopefully a friendly, final workshop in the elementary school, race school, wound up to be a 4-hour shouting match. With almost, I had almost a fist fight. And so the planning board frankly gave it up. The planning board's keeping its current zoning. The current zoning's 3-acre lots in rural areas. It's big lots downtown. There's a large amount of expensive review of different factors. There's one right now that I think is ridiculous going on. It's one project that's being proposed, and it's allegedly in a floodplain, and now it's subject to 3 evaluations, all paid for by the developer. Some of those things go too far. At any rate, a different approach might help Norwich to get out of the big development syndrome and mentality, to see what could be done on smaller scales around town. And perhaps there could be some village centers that might become an area to focus more diverse housing. Union Village could be one. There could be a new Union Village somewhere else. Anyway, this is a start.
Thank you.
Speaker. Thank you. I would like for you to really consider who you're targeting this new housing for. And I have to put a plug in young professionals. You don't have to go far to read about the silver tsunami. And we are hit. and our 3 states, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, are the oldest in the country.
Although we just became number 3 instead of number 2.
We're 2.
Yeah, New Hampshire's now number 2.
New Hampshire's 2, Maine is 1. But the bottom line is, we have to be able to provide housing and a lifestyle that's going to attract the young professionals. We need them desperately to take care of us someday. And so to that end, the Upper Valley Housing Coalition, when I think Jonathan was still on the board with me, we did a focus group with the Upper Valley Young Professionals, which is an organization, and they don't discriminate on age. You can stop in and meet them, lovely people. We're talking attorneys, doctors, truly wage-earning professionals with huge college debt, okay? So that's why for many of them, the rental option is really the only option that they can swing at this time. And that's why they're paying $1,000 for a studio 1-bed or $1,200. They're paying up to $2,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment, plus heat. They're paying because they can't afford to buy a house. But we need to do something to support these young people, and their demographic group wants a town center. Don't find some nice little chunky piece of woods. They're not going to be happy there. Walking to a town center, nightlife, whatever that is, we've got more now than we did 35 years ago.
This is Norwich, right?
This is
I know, people come from other states to talk from our board.
Really high-speed internet is important. A lot of them do work from home and download heavy files. And they're willing to live in a smaller space if there's common space. A garden, what are they called? Roof gardens. We actually finally have a developer in Lebanon who is building the first apartment built, well, actually they're now condos, with a roof garden. And I said, this is going to be great. And incidentally, this developer was approved to build 2 office buildings. He built the first one, got fully occupied with businesses, and was ready to build the second one. And he went to those same businesses and said, well, what should I build for the second building? And they said, housing for our employees where they can get to work. So, we can face it, we can ignore it, but it's here, and hopefully we're going to be able to come up with solutions.
Well, that's a nice segue, because I was about to bring up that if you look at the bulk of the workforce, it is on the other side of the river, and that's where the need is. And you, unfortunately, are representing the Dartmouth side. I grew up in Chicago, and long, long ago, there was an area called Pullman Village. And Pullman trains, he built the village. It was partly, he had a view of his utopian society, which was basically trapping workers away from everything else, and then you create a world for them, but it had a positive side. So is Dartmouth, is Hypertherm, are they planning on getting into the real estate business beyond building these small houses for junior faculty?
They'd be a great private development work.
So again, I work at the Medical Center, Facilities Management, and we are, everything you just said is what we're suffering from, trying to recruit people here, especially young people. And so that's part of why I'm here today, to see what I can learn. We are very interested in workforce housing and trying to determine what we can do, the Medical Center, to try to support that. One question I have is what is the demand? Do we have any sense, or are there any statistics that can say how many units do we need to try to solve this problem? Because it's a problem that we're having trouble recruiting people because of it.
The Regional Planning Commission did a housing needs assessment about 5 years ago. And I'm about to undertake a revision to that, an update of that. But those figures were the Upper Valley needs about 6,000 rolling out.
Yeah.
Does that include Claremont in the micro?
Yes, it does. Our region goes down to Claremont and up to Orford.
So one very...
The answer from you is Dartmouth and DH are not actively in the real estate business and working to build housing, to actually own the housing for their workers. I'm just trying to get some reality testing here. Circa today.
So the challenge is the medical center doesn't have the depth and revenue or the amount of money or capital needed to do it ourselves.
Come on, I retired from that place. It's $1.5 billion operation. They've got the money, and they've got the bond rating to come up with the money. They have to have the will.
I don't know if that's true. But we're interested in
So, Steve needs to go and give them a final statement, and then I have something to say, you have something to say, you have something to say.
One final thought about the affordable housing, and it's an issue that's not widely discussed, but if you don't allow for type of housing that we're discussing in a growth area like the Upper Valley, the buyers keep pushing out into more rural areas. And you basically end up with rural gentrification.
Right.
And the real homeowners who had lived here for many generations get squeezed out. And you can go and you can see many examples in the Upper Valley about rural gentrification. And it's a problem that really needs to be dealt with. I have an 1.5-hour drive that I have to make.
Thank you.
You're not driving fast,
No, I'm driving a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Very modest proposal. What I think Upper Valley is missing, in part, is an entity that wakes up every morning and says, how can I develop housing at below market levels that I'm going to rent and sell kind of at an affordable price, right? We have a great developer that does housing with subsidies through low-income housing tax credits, and we have developers that are trying to make 25% profit, and we need those too. What we don't have is somebody who says, how can I find a place to build 20 units, 30 units, 50 units, and sell it at a reasonable price and keep it affordable over time. And maybe the existing developer could do that, or maybe not. But it takes risk. We heard it's a risky proposition, right? And so it takes capital, and it takes expertise. But if we had that, actually, there are places to develop housing in the Upper Valley. We lack the capacity. We don't have the development capacity to do it because the for-profit developers, they need to make a profit, and that's just part of how that works, right? So we need somebody who doesn't need to make as much of a profit. And so if the businesses in Upper Valley got together and said we're going to capitalize that kind of entity, whether it's an existing group or not, you can make it happen. So think about it. Here, and then Beth, and then I think we've reached our time.
I just want to second what Jonathan was talking about. One thought that coming to this meeting, what came to my mind is zoning. And, allowing houses to be, either have apartments or to be turned into duplexes, things like that. I mean, I heard a while ago that you weren't allowed to have more than, a few unrelated people living in a house. I don't think that's, I don't know anybody goes around and checks that, but.
Unrelated living in the same quarters.
You can create accessory dwelling units you could create another dwelling unit on your house. Nathan did it, it's proof.
Yeah, and it's now allowed in New Hampshire despite zoning.
Do you still have to have something attached to it like they did on Main Street where Lila Ketch was? Where Susan White and Kenneth moved, when they put an apartment over the garage, they had to have something, a breezeway, connecting it. They weren't allowed to do it.
I don't think so.
In New Hampshire, they can be attached or detached.
I think they can be attached or detached now in Vermont too.
But it's a local, my question is, Jeff, but it's a local choice, it's not just a state choice, right?
So both Vermont and New Hampshire have state laws that require basically localities to allow this kind of thing. And we do already have zoning that allows it. What we don't have a lot of it happening, and we're going to have another forum about that, and if there's something we could do to make more of it happen.
I just, again, Beth Long, Twin Pines, I just want to say that we actually are talking to Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center, and we're looking at land in New Hampshire because of Act 250. So we were able to develop, we've started on 30 units in White River Junction because of the zoning, right? It was outside of the Act 250. So we have one lot that we're developing right now, 30 units. The reason I wanted to mention it is because 9 of those units are going to be in workforce housing, 80 to 120% of average median income because of Governor Scott's housing bond bill. So there's
excuse me.
Yeah, I don't think I've got
Legislature. We just signed. Came out of my committee. That's true.
I actually knew that, then, I stand corrected. So, it just gets referred to all the time. So,
let's not do the political thing, right? It's a bill.
But the interesting thing, to go back to what Steve was saying, there aren't very many places on the Vermont side of the river that we can develop without going through Act 250. And to reiterate, what Steve said, we've done it in Safford, right? 10 years, $1 million of litigation costs to get through Act 250. So, Steve talks about carrying costs of $6,000 per unit to get through entitlement. And I thought to myself, we would pay for that. If I could spend $6,000 per unit to get through entitlement, I would do it today. But that's, and I don't know how White River Junction has this block available for, for development. But if you look at the issues, that's, people are developing where you're able to more easily and read that as a lower cost develop.
Is that because it's a village center? I mean, town
Yes.
center? No,
It's a-
there are different Act 250 requirements that apply, right, if you're in a town
It
center?
is, that whole entire law.
Designated
It's a
district or something.
designated
Yeah, but
designated
I
downtown.
don't think that gets you out of Act 250.
Doesn't mean you got Act 250 entirely, but it's a different, more streamlined process.
It's a streamlined Act 250 process. For designated downtown.
Yes, that is correct.
I think that's what's happening.
It was really easy.
Why can't you,
Is it South Main Street?
Yes.
why can't you do a stream?
Sykes Mountain Avenue development, not South Main.
And we can't do that because we don't have this.
Right, so the question is whether, because without the sewer.
So we have reached our time, and we have a speaker who's going to get the last word because she came and volunteered. But thank you all for coming. This has been a really stimulating conversation. The fact that you were going to get out, you're going to leave early, you stayed to the end. I mean, it shows you. This was a stimulating conversation, a lot of great ideas. And so the last word, thank you for
Pearls of wisdom. So I wanted to address, someone was asking about the demand, and there's a lot of rental units being built. I mean, there's like almost 1,000 in Lebanon that have been approved and or under construction. And you think, oh no, you know, how can that be? Well, they get built and they get occupied. I mean, Emerson Place, 180 units, occupied. Timberwood Commons, 252 units within 1 year of that first building being completed. All 252 units were occupied because it's a mile from the hospital. So, I mean, there is the need, the demand is there, but here's what drives me crazy. And I've said this in the business leader breakfast meetings, and I'm sorry, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm glad it's going on TV. Because when good housing comes on the market at the 200,000, 250 mark, which is where these young professionals and first-time buyers need to buy their first home. And by the way, if they're funding that home has to be in good condition to get decent mortgages, okay? No peeling paint. I'll tell you what happens. They get bought up by investors who pay cash and overbid and push these people out of the market. So when you talk about your good landlord who keeps your rates down, that's wonderful. And landlords can get market rate, and we have a 2 to 3% vacancy rate come year in, year out. I've been tracking it for 15 years. But what we need to do is persuade our fellow Upper Valley people, the investors, to lay off for a little while and let some people get in and buy housing that really deserve it and need it. Thank you very much.